So our final presentation of the day will be cataloging oral history collections and individual interviews in ArchivesSpace. Your presenters are Christy Bailey-Tomecek, I'm sorry, Christy, from Yale University, Tiffany Cole from James Madison University, Alston Cobourn from East Carolina University, and your session moderator will be Sarit Han of the AP Corporate Archives. Sarit is going to start us off with introductions for this round. So Sarit, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. As you can see, the title, Cataloging Oral History Collections and Individual Interviews in ArchivesSpace. My name is Sarit Hand. I am the digital archivist for the Associated Press Corporate Archives at the Associated Press. I currently serve as a council member on the ArchivesSpace Technical Advisory Committee, among many other things that I've done. So I just wanted to let you all know a little bit about how this came about. I often get questions about how I catalog different collections into ArchivesSpace, and I'm currently attempting to catalog oral histories and was looking for resources of my own. And so I asked Jessica, basically, have we ever discussed this in the forum? And she said she couldn't think of a time that we did. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity, and thankfully, I reached out on a couple of in a couple of groups, and three wonderful archivists stepped up and volunteered to share what they have done. But first thing I wanted to tell you is that there are some specific goals with this presentation. First of all, it's great to see what other institutions are doing. And I think visually seeing it and going through some of the mechanics of what they've done will help others, as including myself, guide us in our work in cataloging oral histories in ArchivesSpace. Also, the hopes here is that we'll have a little bit of a community discussion on the mechanics of using ArchivesSpace for this purpose. So I do hope that everyone will take the opportunity to share your own experiences or ask questions. The other hope here is that you will leave with some tangible tools that will help you with your own cataloging oral histories in ArchivesSpace. And so I will be sharing with Jessica a short list of some resources the four of us, the three panelists and myself, put together for people to reference. Just a reminder, putting your questions into the Q&A or the chat. They will all be addressed after each presentation. Each presentation is only going to be around 10 minutes. That way we will have plenty of time for discussion. And if you wish to speak, which I hope you will, please just indicate in the Q&A or chat so that Jessica will be able to call on you and let you know that it's your turn. And as I mentioned, a short listing of resources will be made available. So please definitely chime in with your own thoughts, experiences, and suggestions. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Christy Bailey-Tomecek, I hope I didn't butcher that too. Her presentation is Cataloging Testimonies at the Fortunoff Archive. Christy is the project archivist at the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies at Yale University. She oversees transcription and indexing of the archive's collection of audiovisual testimonies, as well as generally manage the collection's metadata and description. She serves as co-chair for the Yale Archival Management Systems Committee, which helps maintain and develop ArchivesSpace in Yale. Our second presenter will be Tiffany Cole. Her presentation is titled The Shenandoah National Park Oral History Collection, a case study in cataloging 135 interview collection in ArchivesSpace. Tiffany is the archivist at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. In her role at JMU, Tiffany manages all aspects of collection processing, including new and legacy arrangement and description. Tiffany also assists with collecting development, reference, outreach, and instruction. She earned her MA in Public History in JMU. She has been a member of Society of American Archivists since 2016. The Academy is certified archivist since 2018. and earned SAA's Arrangement and Description Certification in March 2020. Congratulations, Tiffany. Tiffany has been a member of MERIC since 2014 and is the senior co-chair of MERIC's Finding Aids Award Committee. Tiffany was recently elected to SAA's College and University Archives Section Steering Committee. Our final presenter will be Alston Cobourn. Alston is the university archivist at East Carolina University. Previously, she was the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Washington and Lee University, the Processing and Digital Assets Librarian at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and a staff member at North Carolina State University. She holds a Master's of Library Science with a concentration in Archives and Records Management from UNC Chapel Hill, and her presentation is titled Oral Histories in the University Archives. And from there, Christy will be our first presenter. Christy, if you are ready.
I'm ready. I just need you to stop sharing your screen.
I just saw your chat.
Okay.
I just also want to say that having met these women for the first time, I have really enjoyed our conversations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Christy Bailey-Tomecek. I'm sorry, the Eastern European diacritics didn't really carry over. And today I'm going to talk about cataloging testimonies at the archive. I also want to mention that my allergies are acting up, so if I randomly start coughing, I apologize. Okay. If you'll let me go. Okay. So a little background about the Fortunoff Archive. It was founded in 1979 as a New Haven grassroots organization called the Holocaust Survivors Film Project. It came to Yale in the mid-1980s as the video archive for Holocaust testimonies. We were later endowed by the Fortunoff family, hence our name. Archive records are of testimonies of survivors, witnesses, bystanders, resistance, and liberators of the Holocaust. We are the ones that record the testimonies, but we don't record them by ourselves. We have also partnered with affiliate projects throughout the world to record in North America, South America, Europe, and Israel. We still record today in New Haven, but as you can guess, our recording has dropped off. Our collection now contains over 4,500 testimonies in over a dozen languages. And the archive transitioned to ArchivesSpace in 2017, actually a little bit later than most Yale repositories. So going into ArchivesSpace, our metadata resided in the following places. Our collection description is still stored in MARC records. We use them in our OPAC Orbis, and we follow mostly special collection standards at Yale. We don't particularly diverge, aside from the fact that we have a very robust corpus of local subject headings to cover experiences of survivors that may not be covered in Library of Congress. Our collection management information was stored in the Paradox database, which I'm pretty sure is about 4 years younger than I am. So yes, it was from the early 1990s. We still have that data in the SQL dump, but it was formally decommissioned in 2018. And then our access and circulation information, when we still used VHS tapes, was stored in Archivist Toolkit. We won't be discussing that kind of information today because it's mostly duplicative of Paradox and our MARC records. So when going into ArchivesSpace, we had to describe several different types of data. One of those were the tapes of various formats and generations. Most of the original testimonies were recorded on either U-matic or Betamax, but then over time were migrated to other newer formats and also migrated to VHS or DVD to serve as use copies. We also need to describe our digitized testimonies. In 2015, I want to say, we started digitizing the entire collection. So those need to be stored and linked to, which we currently have residing in Preservica. And then also we have digitized paper materials related to the collection. This includes releases, pre-interview forms. In as much as possible, we try to put together a brief description of the survivor's experience, just to make sure that we were covering things well and didn't have to keep asking survivors to explain basic parts of their stories. Time synchronized indexes that were created in OHMS or the oral history metadata synchronizer, and transcripts and captions. And then of course we needed to add the top level description that is based in the MARC records. So, okay, because our collection is just oral histories and our predecessor in MARC does a catalog record for each and every testimony, we decided to continue that model within ArchivesSpace. So each testimony gets a resource record with tape generations and associated documents getting an archival object. And at this point, I'm actually going to switch to ArchivesSpace. Okay. So the basics of this. So much of this maps as expected in terms of what the normal fields are, and also follows Yale ArchivesSpace best practices and special collections cataloging conventions in terms of title, language, how we identify languages, and dates of creation. Extents are created for both the original generation of the material. So in this case, this is the, I'm not far down enough. This is the extent for the original 3/4 inch U-matic tapes. And then we also do an extent for the duration or the runtime. So this is about 1 hour and 46 minutes. And then we continue to just follow Yale and Manuscripts and Archives. Fortunoff is actually a child department of Yale's Manuscripts and Archives. For identifiers, the Voyage Bibliographic ID, and other finding aid information you can see down here. So nothing is here specific to Fortunoff. So going down to notes, notes pretty much map pretty closely to our MARC records. I'm going to start naming MARC record fields, so I apologize if you don't have them right at the top of your head. Over here we have the abstract or the 520 field, which is, you know, the basic biography. We have the preferred citations, which is the 524. We have conditions governing access and conditions governing use, which were not actually included in the MARC records all the time if there were no outstanding restrictions. That being said, we actually added them programmatically. Most of the initial migration was done by lyricists, and then additional work, including updating language notes, adding all the conditions governing access notes, were either done by me programmatically through the API or by the metadata archivist in Manuscripts and Archives, Alicia Dedelich. We also list the place of recording. This was originally stored in the 260 field, subfield A. It's a general note in here with a label of place of recording. And then if present, we also add the related materials, basically anything in the 544. So you may notice we actually have a runtime here as well. This is because this was migrated before it was an actual extent in ArchivesSpace. So this is kind of a leftover. It's been since superseded by the duration. And one of these days, I will actually do the cleanup to remove those. Moving on to agents and subjects. So all of our creators, corporate entities, subject headings, geographic headings, and all local versions are imported to appropriate agent and subject headings. For following normal special collections cataloging standards here, interviewees are listed as both creators and subjects. Creator version has their relator as interviewee. You may also, there's this weird be Ava with the number string. This has to do with privacy concerns at the Fortunoff archive. We truncate last names to protect the privacy of survivors. So we have that ugly linking there too. Interviewers are also listed with the role of creator, with the relator of interviewer. The recording organization, whether it's us, if it's an affiliate project, if it's our predecessor like here, they are normally stored in the 260 field, subfield B, in a MARC record, but we made them an agent in our records and with a role of creator and a relator of producer. So moving, if it'll let me, moving up to the archival objects. So you can see here, each generation gets an archival object. So master, duplicate, restoration master, restoration submaster, use copy, you get it. And then releases, pre-interview forms and such are attached at another archival object, administrative documents. So just quickly looking at the AV, because I know I'm talking a lot. So you can see it contains physical facet notes about each of the physical tapes. So it includes what it was created from and the date it was created initially. We also have information about each of the tapes. This was migrated directly from Paradox, which is why it is also a standalone note. And then we also have the top containers here for each of the tapes. So you can see it has the numbering and the barcoding. If the testimony is digitized from that generation, as it is here, the digital objects are linked here. So in this case, it's stored in Preservica, so it has that Preservica prefix. Moving on to administrative documents, as I've said, each type of documents are children archival objects with linking to the appropriate digital objects in Preservica. So just looking at this, so you can see that, and look at this. Digitized and born digital materials are also ingested into Preservica, like I said, which posts back to the appropriate archival object in terms of linking based on workflows that were created specifically for Fortunoff. I do not work with them directly, so I cannot answer questions about it, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow. So I did want to quickly mention our access system, which is Aviary. Aviary was developed by AVP with assistance from Fortunoff. We were a major funder for this project. The data syncs directly from ArchivesSpace with a link to Aviary created as additional object at the resource record level. Their mappings were developed against our ArchivesSpace data structure. And the majority, but not all of ArchivesSpace's descriptive data that we have is present in Aviary, and the digitized testimony files, indexes, transcripts, and captions are all there as well. So just to quickly show you what this testimony looks like in Aviary, you can see we have the video, the appropriate descriptive metadata, and then indexes and transcripts. So that's what I got here. Thank you so much for your attention, and I guess I will turn it back to Sarit. I can figure out how to stop the share.
Thank you, Christy. That was a great look at what you've done. Tiffany Cole, you're up next.
Thank you, Sarit. And I also want to say thank you to Christy. That was amazing. I was furiously taking notes. So
me too, Tiffany.
This is great. All right. So I'm coming at this from a kind of a different perspective as Christy, which I think is what's great about ArchivesSpace, or maybe what might be frustrating for those of the people in the that are attending that might want a one-size-fits-all approach. My instance is kind of different. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the Shenandoah National Park oral history collection and how we kind of manage a 135 interview collection in ArchivesSpace. So just some quick context about this particular collection and about how we collect oral histories at JMU more broadly. I should say that most of our oral histories, most of our interviews form part of larger oral history collections that are based around a shared theme, topic, or subject. They are discrete collections that were either created as part of a class or faculty's just kind of research interest, or were donated as a collection. So we rarely deal with one-off interviews. So when I talk about oral history collections, it's going to be 2 or more. This is obviously a pretty huge collection and our largest collection of oral histories. And the SNP collection contains interviews that were conducted with people who were living in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia prior to the creation of the Shenandoah National Park, which was established in 1935. So again, you've got 135 interviews, most of them conducted in the late 70s. So you've got this resource record, which is the collection, and then underneath that, we have about 500 archival objects that are nested underneath the collection. So that includes your file level interview, and I'm going to share screenshots in a little bit so you'll be able to see what that looks like. That also includes transcripts, physical transcripts, supporting documents, and we also include media, though not all of the media has been inventoried and is not currently in ArchivesSpace. So the original media is not inventoried in ArchivesSpace, but we do have all of the obsolete surrogates and preservation copies that have been inventoried and are in ArchivesSpace. So this is going to be kind of like a really quick tour of this particular resource record, how it all works in ArchivesSpace. I'm going to talk about legacy description, which we're all very familiar with, I'm sure. I'm going to be sharing some screenshots of the staff view of our ArchivesSpace instance and the PUI as well. So legacy description, what do I mean? What kind of legacy description do we have with this collection? We've been stewarding this particular collection of interviews for about 20 years when we first received the donation. And each one of those interviews has its own individual MARC record. The collection also has a MARC record. So what that means is we have subject headings for each of these individual interviews. We have summary notes, which is the 520 field. We have all kinds of legacy metadata. So I put in the spreadsheet meme because it also means a lot of spreadsheets, and trying to get a handle of this collection and the creators has been, 2 decades in the works. So we've also have legacy finding aids that are in HTML that have evolved over time. How do we track release forms, consent agreements that may or may not exist? This collection has also been in multiple digital repositories over the course of its life at JMU. It was first entered into ArchivesSpace in 2019. So this whole thing is putting all the stuff we know, or at least the stuff that matters to our users, into one central location. We consider ArchivesSpace to be our system of record. So what stuff do users want to know? And we consider ourselves users. So the people that work in the institution, we are users. Our researchers externally are also users of this material. So I want to give a huge shout out to my former illustrious colleague, Sarah Roth-Mullet, who did all of the heavy lifting to import legacy metadata and description into ArchivesSpace using some bulk import spreadsheets. This is, I am not anywhere an expert in bulk imports or bulk import spreadsheets. So I have some screenshots, and that's what I'll say about that. So there was a Yale import spreadsheet for archival objects, and then the Harvard import for digital objects that we utilized to automate the ingest of all of the relevant metadata once the resource record was created. And I shared this out with Sarit, so I know she will share it out with Jessica, who will share it out with the larger group. Some of the links to these spreadsheets and even some new ones that are available currently on GitHub. So what fields do we populate at any given level? So This is the current situation at my repository. It does not necessarily reflect aspirational goals. As I said, as Christy was talking, I was making notes. So there are some aspirational goals not reflected here that I already have ideas for implementing. You know, kind of at the resource collection level, your standard DAX compliant fields we use. I do want to highlight the fact that we currently are only tracking extent at the collection level. So at the end of my presentation, I will talk about how that's kind of an aspirational thing to do at the interview or the file level. But currently we only track the extent at the collection level. And then the fields that we currently have populated at the file or the interview level, you know, include title, unique identifier, et cetera, et cetera. And we also include agent links for creators only at this time, conditions governing use, which I'll talk about in a little bit because those do and can change from interview to interview, a scope and contents note that's related back to legacy metadata, which I will talk about, and digital objects, which we link at the file or at the interview level. And this is just kind of what it looks like. So this is just a screenshot in the staff view of the SNP oral history collection. Again, you have the collection as the top level, and then we have 135 files. So this is like an intellectual file, not necessarily a physical file, though the intellectual file, which is the interview, also has physical files associated with them. And I do also just want to say that importing this collection and other oral history collections into ASpace has allowed us to gain control over these collections in a way that we weren't able to before when they were just represented in a MARC record. I mean, it required us to inventory media, to link digital objects in our institutional repository, you know, increase discoverability beyond just a MARC record. So I do just want to emphasize that. So I will say that we're actively having conversations at my institution about whether to publish or unpublish the associated media with each one of these collections. So your digital object is your access point, but then inevitably for any particular interview, you're going to have a handful of obsolete media types that the researcher will never be able to access. We have decided to retain them, but again, ArchivesSpace is our system of record, so it's important to have them in ArchivesSpace, but do we publish or unpublish? Currently, they're published. So you'll see what that looks like. So the next slide here is you're gonna see what it looks like once you drill down beyond the interview level. So you've got, again, you have your digital object is linked at the file level. And then you have items underneath that, which include transcript, which is in a box, in a folder, on a physical shelf. And then you have most of the media associated with any one interview, which can include preservation CDs, which I'm using air quotes. You can't see preservation CD, which is a gold CD, which was the kind of the be all end all, I don't know, like 10 years ago. It's obsolete at this point, and obsolete surrogate audio cassettes. So all of that is included under the file or the interview level for our oral history collections. You know, this kind of goes without saying, as you can see from the items, but you know, our interviews have gone through various stages of reformatting over the years. And again, we are choosing to include it, but you know, hopefully we'll have some resolution as to, is it valuable for our researchers, our external researchers, for that to be published, for them to be able to see it, or does it just confuse them and does it muddy the waters? And so here's the digital object on the left-hand side. This is the PUI. This is this interview. And then you've got the red box, which links out to our institutional repository, which is bpress, which houses all of our special collections. And then from there, you can download, you can view and or download the transcript, and you can also listen to the audio of each one of these interviews. I should also say we're currently going through adopting the ArchivesSpace PUI. We've like semi-adopted it, but we're like currently doing customization. So there's some wonkiness to our site. And I will share a link at the end so you'll be able to see all of that. Moving on. So I'm wrapping up here and I just want to highlight a few of the fields that we populate at the interview / at the file level that add value, that are particularly important at the interview level, kind of beyond our date or our title, that may change from interview to interview. So again, interview specific restrictions, and I've highlighted here use restrictions, so conditions governing use. These vary from interview to interview, as I'm sure you're all aware, depending on whether or not an interview has signed a consent agreement, or if they're requesting restrictions, or if they requested to be anonymized. All of these things can vary from one interview to the next. And also, it's too onerous to capture at the collection level, and it doesn't make sense capturing that at the collection level if specific interviews have interview specific restrictions, whether it's use or access restrictions. And scope and content. So this is all related to legacy metadata. I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna give you a caveat. We do not do item level description, except of course, when we do item level description. So here's a case where we've done item level description. So when the MARC records were created for these interviews that form part of this larger collection, a summary was created, a 520 note in the MARC record, which directly corresponds, I think as Christy mentioned, to the abstract. We've decided to populate it in the scope and contents field because it's more visible in the PUI in ArchivesSpace. If you put it in the abstract, it's at least the way our PUI is currently functioning, it's kind of buried. So we have it in the scope note, and this is a summary that, you know, is more specific to this particular interview. And so you can see in the upper right corner what it looks like in the staff view, just your scope and contents note, and then what it looks like in the PUI. And then agent records. So we had some pretty good conversations preparing for this panel, talking about agent records. I will say this is a work in progress. This is semi-aspirational, we are actively doing this work, but creating agents for each one of our oral history interviews. So again, most of our interviews are part of larger collections, but again, it doesn't make sense to link your agents at the collection level when that's like interview specific. So you might have a body or a course or a professor who provided the collection to the institution. So that might be your source, your donor, but then your creators are unique to each individual interview. So we're currently going through that and making that a priority for our oral history interviews. So we currently are linking agents that are creators, agents as subjects as aspirational, working through all of this. So we consider interviewees, interviewers, and even transcribers as creators of these interviews. And on the right-hand side, you see what it looks like and how it translates to the PUI. And what's next for us? Again, some of this is aspirational. And I do want to reiterate, we're currently moving toward fully adopting the ASpace PUI. So a lot of our decisions and how we input the data into ArchivesSpace is informed by user needs. Again, we are users, but also our external researchers. So reiterating, creating agent records for all creators and subjects at the interview level. Also consider adding extents at the interview level. It obviously makes sense at the collection level, but there are also specific extents that we know that are important to capture at the interview level, whether it's runtime, duration, number of pages in a transcript. I've seen other places do. So just deciding what's most valuable and most useful for our researchers. And then also consider adding subject headings at the interview level. This goes back to the legacy MARC records that were created probably 15 years ago. So these interviews all have their own subject headings, even though the collection kind of generally, they all have shared subjects. Each individual interview has its specific subject headings that may differ from what was created at the collection level. So is that valuable? If the information has been captured, maybe it's worth putting into ASpace, or maybe it's just, it's not. The juice might not be worth the squeeze. Again, remembering that the point of all of this for us is enhancing the description when it increases user discoverability and ultimately access. So I will leave you with a few links. The top link will take you to this particular finding aid in our ASpace PUI, and then the bottom link takes you to the collection in bpress. So you'll be able to access the transcripts and the audio if you're interested in this collection. And Sarit, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tiffany. That was great. If you don't mind, if you could put those links into the chat so that everyone can actually click on it, that'll be awesome. That was fantastic. Okay, and if you'll unshare, next up is Alston Cobourn, and following which we'll hopefully have a nice discussion.
Okay. I'm stuck here, guys.
Do you see the stop sharing?
There, the window went away and now it's back.
All right. Okay. Alston.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alston Cobourn. I am going to share my screen. And I'm also going to tell you that I have a helper cat who's decided this is the time to help me. So if you hear meowing, that's why. All right. Okay, so you can see me and hear me, or see my screen and hear me, correct?
We can.
All good.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So yes, I'm Alston Cobourn, and I just want to share a little bit to start about my institutional context. So the Special Collections Division at East Carolina University contains the University Archives Department, which is my domain, as well as a Manuscripts and Rare Books Department, the North Carolina Collection, and a Digital Curation Unit. I also will go ahead and note that we are using ArchivesSpace as our archival management system, but we do not use the ArchivesSpace PUI. Our PUI was developed in-house. So I've got a couple of screenshots to share and sort of talk about how things are like generally organized, and then we'll talk about some specifics of description. So most of our oral histories, all of the ones that I've added since my arrival in 2018 are part of the UA 95 Oral History Collection record group. So then I catalog the individual oral histories, which we have a lot of times where things are just done as an individual oral history. But also we have some that are groups of oral histories, say that a class did for a project. And those, I catalog them all as subgroup level resource records. So all of the record groups have top level resource records like the one on this screen at present. And that the goal with that is sort of a couple main things. One, they give a general overview of the topic of the resource group and what is in it broadly. And then they have the key function of linking to the finding aids for the subgroups. So down at the bottom in that related materials note, there are links to all those other finding aids for the individual or groups of interviews that are part of the UA 95 record group. And so this is an example of a resource record for an individual oral history, a Born Digital one that was done in the last year or 2 years. In this case, it is subgroup 95-16, the Kenneth Hammond Oral History. And so I will also point out that it too has a related materials note that points back to that larger record group finding aid we were just looking at. So the idea is that the linking goes both directions to help people be able to find things or similar materials. I will also point out that the ways we have our digitized content linked to the finding aid. There is a button on the left side menu that will take people to all of the items from the collection that are digitized and made available in our digital collections platform, which our digital collections platform is a locally developed system. And then there's also a link to each specific digitized item or folder within the container list. So I'm excited about both of those things, but they haven't actually impacted the way that I've done our description. And then we do have some instances where a group of oral histories were created as a discrete project, like this one here, in which case I described them together in a single subgroup level resource record. So the individual oral histories within the project are recorded as components within the resource record, right, as archival objects, and you can see those down at the bottom of the screen in the container list, falling off of the screen. And so to talk a little bit about, some specifics about description, I should say that just during the prep for this presentation, I learned that the Oral History Association has guidelines on how to describe oral histories, and that makes a lot of good sense. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't really do a lot of searching for guidelines or seek a lot of outside advice when I was first starting to describe the Born Digital oral histories that we were recording since my arrival. And, I was thinking about it when I was preparing for this, that really, I think that's because before I was an archivist, I was a cataloger. And I know, right, we've had discussion in this session earlier about, cataloging and how things map to MARC and all this. So from that training before, I just kind of tend to naturally fall back on it, and when I'm doing description of like all materials, I tend to be always thinking sort of about which pieces of data should go in what fields. I think also to note, like I've done a lot of description, a lot of metadata creation in Dublin Core at other jobs where I manage DSpace repositories, and I've done a ton of work in Omeka over the years, which also uses Dublin Core. So I think thinking about metadata mapping is sort of just a thing that's kind of always in my brain. And so I definitely think that it's important for us to have discussions like we are hoping to do today, about different ways we can do things and why. And, looking to guidelines that exist is obviously a great idea. So I plan to do more of both of those things. But I think, what the point I would like to make sure we make is that if you have experience working with metadata in any other standard, MARC, Dublin Core, probably also METs or mods, right? Anything like that. I mean, you can definitely draw on those experiences as you're thinking about how to approach description in ArchivesSpace for oral histories or other things. Because a lot of the key concepts, like, what is a creator, are fundamentally, kind of are the same. So I also, in thinking about how to describe stuff, kind of just spent some time thinking about the local practices we had for archival description of other materials and which of those seemed, like it would fit right in and would be applicable to describing oral histories as well. So with creators, I add both the interviewer/interviewers plural and the interviewee/interviewees plural as agents with the type of creator in both the case of the individual oral histories and when we have groups of oral histories. And that decision was informed just sort of by the way MARC got me to think about creators way back in the day. Generally, and also that's like consistent with the way we use creator for our other archival descriptions at our institution. We reserve source for donors that aren't always creators. aren't also creators. And we mark people as subjects when the person is the subject of the item, but not also the creator. Although, you know, I think probably what Christy suggested about marking them as both the creator and the subject is probably better. So I may try to have us revisit that at some point. For the records for individual oral histories, I always record the name of the interviewee in the title line, such as Kenneth Hammond Oral History. And both names end up, I put them within the scope and contents note, since that is our main description, descriptive note of the item. With extents, the oral histories that I've been really cataloging have all been born digital. So I tend to record the file size of that audio file as our extent. Like, you know, I had 1.17 gigabytes or something on the Kenneth Hammond one. If I had an audio cassette and a physical paper transcription that I was storing, I would record an extent of 2 items. When I was prepping for this presentation, I realized that, you know, when we digitize audio and video recordings, which we do fairly often, they aren't usually oral histories, but they're other things. I do always include like a runtime in my description of those items. And so it occurred to me, well, I don't have a good reason why I haven't been doing that in the born digital oral histories. I think I just forgot. But I think that going forward, I should definitely do that. So I'm going to probably in the main descriptive note, but then also as an extra extent field. With subjects, I do not assign subjects. The special collections catalogers and technical services add those based on the description that I put into the scope and contents note. That's just our local practice. And the scope and contents note for records for individual oral histories, that is the place where I add the description of what's discussed in the oral history and who's doing the discussing. In the records for groups of oral histories, I record information about the shared theme of the oral histories in that location. I don't record information about the digital transcript file that we create for the born digital oral histories. That's really because that file, it goes in our digital collections platform with the sound recording. So I tend not to think of that as part of the actual collection, in that like it's not the original item and I'm not really the one holding on to it or the one responsible for its care necessarily. It's living on, you know, a special digital collection server, and it's really something that those folks are managing. I do try to make sure, so I also provide descriptive information to the digital collections team that then they put in the, they use for in the digital collections platform where the, you know, oral history is actually files going to be for people to listen to, right? And where the transcript is that people can look at. So I try to make sure that the information I'm including in ArchivesSpace is parallel, right, to the information that I'm giving them, that it all sort of matches up. I think that's really important. And then I guess I'll say also that I like I said, mostly I've been doing stuff with these born digital oral histories, but we do have a bunch of analog things as well that predate my time here. And I do have a set that I found recently that had been someone put, you know, kind of off in the middle of a broader audio recordings collection, right? Which is sort of a hodgepodge of stuff that someone smashed together from various places. And so they were all created by a particular class in like, you know, 1995-ish. So what I'm going to do with those is we're going to get them digitized this year. And then I will, you know, catalog them basically the same way as I was just talking about. But, you know, the things that will be different will be that obviously, right, I'm going to try to make sure I include all that information about runtime, like I was saying. There will be information about the physical media itself. I'll need to make sure I include that, as well as sort of where, you know, physically where it's living in the stacks, that original media item. And the description, like I do have paper copies of transcriptions for those. So I will be making sure that I include some information about the fact that physical transcripts exist as well, because that is like, I am the one charged with managing that physical piece of paper. So that's just a little about both. And I'm happy to take questions as well. This is me, how you can find me. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alston. That was wonderful. So obviously there's a lot that you can cover, but as you can see, this is 3 different institutions with various ways in which they catalog based on the institution itself. So I would like to just start off, well, there's actually a question from Kate Bowers. What do you use, if you do, as an oral history specific content standard? For example, I guess oral history cataloging manual. And I'll speak to that myself first, and I welcome the others to also comment. Actually, that was for me when I started working on this, that was actually one of the first things I did reference. And since I wanted to use the bulk importer spreadsheet, I started trying to map the oral history cataloging manual to the bulk importer spreadsheet to see which pieces would fit into which field. And that was quite the process, because obviously it's much older and predates ArchivesSpace. So just as the first example is in the title in the cataloging manual dictates that the date is included, if possible, in the title, whereas in ArchivesSpace, the date is a separate field. So mapping that out and breaking out which data and so on and so forth. The dates are also a little bit different in the way the catalog displays, but in terms of formatting and style, I did find that useful. How about you ladies? Do you have Alston, Tiffany, Christy?
I'll go. So the cataloging standard that Fortunoff uses was actually created in the early 80s by the then archivist, the collection management archivist who handles a lot of the physical related cataloging, and then Joanne, who worked as an archivist and was the director. She was the direct predecessor to the current director, and 2 out of 3 of them were not trained as catalogers, really. So they followed MARC standards at the time, but they did not use any direct oral history cataloging. It was kind of a weird homebrew. So it worked out. There's a couple of clunky things that we've been working on fixing, but we haven't used direct oral history cataloging manuals.
Thank you. I have some question for the 3 of you. In our group, when we had discussed this presentation, one of the things that I had asked you about was what you do with administrative records, and for example, like the release forms and everything, and obviously whether to publish, unpublish, it doesn't need to be published, etc. And we discussed actually using events. So can any of you speak to how you utilize, or if you do, events with oral histories?
I'll quickly just chime in just because I don't have too much to say, but other than events, we have just recently started playing around with, and we're using them for when we process collections. So many of our oral history collections are just legacy, it's just legacy collections. So this was all pre-ArchivesSpace. So we haven't used events for consent agreement signed, and then you assign a date to it. So Those are ways you can use events. We have not done that. As far as how we track all of the administrative stuff related to any given oral history collection, we rely kind of exclusively on the paper control files. And then if there are use or access restrictions, we include that in ArchivesSpace, but all of the other stuff is just like hard copies.
Yeah, this is Alston. I will just say that so University Archives is myself, and then there's an assistant archivist, and we have a graduate assistant. So I'm the only person at present doing any sort of, doing the description for these oral histories. And I am the only person who deals with the paperwork for anything that we collect, oral histories and everything else in University Archives. The manuscripts department has other people, they take care of, they have, it's different. Up there, they have different people doing different things. But in UA, because we're so small, like all of that goes through me. So that's good and bad in that, right, I have aspirations to use events for the things like Tiffany was saying, because I mean, that's like the beauty of ArchivesSpace is that you can do things like that. And I've always been really excited about events. But realistically speaking, that has not been a thing that I have found. Like I haven't taken the time to figure out how to fit that into my workflow. I have not taken the time to make sure that I take the time to like do it, every time. So I'm not really using events, but I do want to, and I do think that is a really valuable tool. So on the plus side, right, the fact that I'm not doing that hasn't resulted in mass catastrophe of where is all of our paperwork, because as I said, I'm the only person dealing with it, which means, right, I just am able to keep track of it since I'm the only one with the hands on it. But yeah, we have paper files that we keep for things, and then I always digitize I go ahead and scan the signed forms, the letters, the thank you letters, like the gift in kind forms, all that sort of stuff. It gets scanned, and we have copies in the J drive where anyone in the division could access them if they need to. So that's really what's happening to that now, but I do want to start doing more of the events. I guess I can make that a goal for this year, is to start doing that.
Is there anybody in the the participants, anybody want to speak or ask any other questions? I could keep going on with questions. So I will ask another question is, well, events versus now accessioning. What kind of accessioning records do you create at all, if at all? Especially when, you may have legacy collections that come to you as a whole set versus if you have a project that may be accruing new interviews on an individual basis. How might you handle that, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I create an accession record anytime we get an individual oral history. Like I create an accession for that. And then I do, when we have projects, right, I typically, most of the projects we get are easier in this regard, in the sense that it's like, we usually know there's going to be approximately this many, oral histories to come from it, and it's going to be completed by like a specific time period, right? So then I end up just creating the accession record as a clump. But I think, but if I did have a project that I knew was going to be ongoing, I would definitely feel that it was important to make sure that everything that's coming in is getting accessioned in some way, shape, or form. But right, I guess you would have to think through the logistical issues of like, do you just update that accession record, periodically? Do you create new ones, right? Those kinds of things. I haven't really had that situation, but I would definitely try to record it one way or another.
We at JMU also create accession. We kind of treat oral histories like any other collection that we get in. It gets an accession record. I'm gonna kind of hypothetically, I'll imagine a scenario where we have, let's say we have an oral history collection and then periodically we get accruals. I imagine what I would probably do is create a new accession and link it to the other accessions. You can do like related accessions in ArchivesSpace and then link all of those related accessions to the resource record, assuming a resource record has been created for that collection of oral histories. But yeah, we don't really do anything different than we would for any other collection. We kind of treat it as any other type of material.
Yeah, I think your related material, what you were saying, the related accessions thing, yes, I think that would be a great way to go.
That's what my parent department, what Manuscripts and Archives does. One of the side effects of working with a collection that is pretty much almost complete, we recorded maybe 3 interviews in 2019, and then the year before that we recorded none. We don't actually create accession records. If we were accruing more regularly, I definitely would push for it. But to be perfectly honest, any form of accessioning that this archive has done lives on a bunch of papers on a clipboard if anyone needs nightmares. So we would have to do a lot of work to get those in. And I think the takeaway here is at this point, we don't see it as worth the effort, as terrible as that sounds.
All right, thank you so much. And I think at 2:58, we have 2 minutes left. If there's anybody who would like to ask a last minute questions.
Sarit, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you, actually.
Perfect.
Yeah, to do some last minute wrap up. But this has been a really great conversation. And thank you to the presenters for not just your presentations, but your willingness to sort of talk things out. Yeah, we're getting some thanks in the comments for a great presentation.